Maria walked into the cozy little diner, her stomach growling from hunger. She had been driving for hours and she couldn't wait to sit down for a hot meal. The smell of fried chicken and mashed potatoes filled the air, making her mouth water. She was used to stopping at this diner on her long drives, a small family-owned place where the food was always delicious and the service was friendly. But today, things would be different. As Maria entered, she was greeted by a waitress, a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a tight smile. Maria, with her dark skin and warm, friendly smile, stepped up to the counter, ready to order. But as soon as the waitress saw her, her smile faltered, and a cold, dismissive look crossed her face. "Excuse me, but we're not serving right now," the waitress said, her voice sharp. "Please wait outside until we're ready." Maria was taken aback. She had never encountered anything like this before. The waitress didn't even give her a chance to ask about the menu or to explain that she was a regular customer. She was just told to leave. "What?" "I've come here many times before," Maria said, her voice calm but confused. "I'm just here for a meal, like always." The waitress didn't flinch. "I said, we're not serving right now. You can go somewhere else." Maria stood still for a moment, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. The words didn't seem to make sense. Why was this woman being so rude? Why was she being asked to leave when there were other customers inside and the diner wasn't even busy? Just as Maria opened her mouth to say something else, a man's voice came from the back. "Is there a problem here, Liz?" The waitress turned quickly, almost startled by the voice. "Oh, no, sir. I was just telling this woman we're not open right now." Maria looked up, her confusion growing. Who was this man, and why did the waitress seem so nervous when he spoke? Anne stepped into view, a tall figure with neatly combed hair and a professional demeanor. He was dressed in a black suit, clearly someone who held some authority. His gaze shifted from the waitress to Maria, and he gave her a polite but distant nod. "Sorry for the confusion," the man said, walking closer, "but I'm afraid we're not serving any more customers today. We've had a long day and we're closing up." Mariah's eyes widened. "I don't understand. The sign outside says you're open until 10 p.m., and it's only 8:30. I've been here many times before, and I've never had an issue. I'm just asking for a meal." The man's expression remained unchanged. "I'm sorry, but that's the way it is tonight." Maria hesitated, then glanced around the diner. There were other customers, mostly white, sitting and eating their meals. She couldn't help but notice that none of them were being asked to leave. This was just about the hours of the diner or the food. It felt like something else was going on. She opened her mouth to protest again, but quickly closed it. She wasn't sure if arguing would help, or if it would make the situation worse. The man turned to the waitress. "Liz, can you please show this lady out?" The waitress nodded and motioned toward the door, her eyes avoiding Mariah's gaze. Maria felt her face flush. Was this really happening? Was she being kicked out because of her race? Before she could say anything more, the door to the diner opened, and a figure walked in. Another man, tall and confident, with a sharp suit and an air of authority. He looked around the diner briefly before his eyes landed on Maria. "Mom?" he said, his voice filled with surprise. Maria blinked, her confusion growing even more. "Sam?" It was her son, Sam, who she hadn't seen in months. He was supposed to be in New York, starting his new job. But here he was standing in the doorway of this small diner, looking just as surprised as she was. But the moment his eyes landed on the waitress, his expression changed. He walked briskly toward her, his eyes narrowed. "Liz, what's going on here?" The waitress froze, her body stiffening as if she had just been caught doing something she shouldn't. Maria could see the guilt on her face. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was something deeper. Maria's heart began to race as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Was her son connected to the diner in some way? Had he come to visit, or was he involved in the business? Sam looked from the waitress to his mother, his jaw clenched. "What's happening, Liz?" he asked again, his voice colder now. Liz opened her mouth to say something, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. She looked at Sam, then at Maria, her eyes filled with fear. The tension in the diner was thick. Maria could feel the eyes of the other customers on her, and she felt a chill run down her spine. Something was wrong, and she could sense it. What was going to happen next? What was Sam going to do? And why was Liz acting like this? Sam's gaze never left the waitress. "Liz, I think you should leave. Now." The waitress's face turned pale, and she quickly turned to the door. Before she could even reach it, Sam called out, his voice sharp. "Wait. I want you to explain yourself first. Why did you treat my mother like that?" Maria stood there, frozen, unable to fully understand the situation. Sam, her son, was speaking to the waitress like he had authority over her, and maybe he did. But how? Why hadn't he mentioned anything about working at this diner? Why was he acting like he knew Liz? And why was she so afraid of him? Sam turned to Maria, his expression softening for the first time since he had entered the diner. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know this was happening." Maria's stomach churned as the realization hit her. There was something more going on here than she could have ever imagined. But just before she could ask more questions, Sam turned back to the waitress, his voice colder than before. "Tell me, Liz, why didn't you serve my mother?" Liz looked trapped, her eyes darting between Sam and Maria. Her mouth opened and closed as if she was trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. Sam's patience was wearing thin. "This isn't just a mistake, is it?" Sam said, his voice steady but full of anger. And just like that, Mariah's world seemed to shift. Everything she thought she knew about this diner, about her son, about the people she thought she could trust, was suddenly in question. Liz opened her mouth to speak, but the words that came out next were even more shocking than anything Maria could have anticipated. "She's not welcome here," Liz finally said, her voice low and trembling. "She never was." Maria's heart skipped a beat. What was Liz talking about? Why would she say something like that? Sam's eyes went wide. His jaw clenched again. "I'm the owner of this diner, Liz," he said, his voice cold. Maria stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Her son was the owner of this diner? The very diner where the waitress had just discriminated against her because of her race? Before she could fully grasp what was happening, Liz's face twisted with shock, and the tension in the room hit an all-time high. What was going to happen next? The air in the diner felt thick with tension as Liz stood frozen, her face pale and her hands trembling. Maria could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her son, Sam, was the owner of the diner. How had she never known this? How had he kept something so big from her? She glanced at Sam, his expression stern, his jaw set tight as if he were holding back a storm. Liz's shock quickly turned to anger. She glared at Sam with disbelief, her voice shaking with the weight of her own emotions. You're the owner?" she sputtered, as if the words were impossible to comprehend. Sam nodded once, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, Liz, I own this place, and I'm not going to stand by and let you treat my family like that." The waitress looked at him as if she was seeing him for the first time, a mix of confusion and fear crossing her face. "But we've worked together for so long." "I never thought." "No, Liz," Sam interrupted, his voice cold. "You didn't think. You let your racism get in the way of doing your job. You treated my mom like she didn't belong here, and that's something I won't tolerate in my business." Maria stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hardly process the words that were being exchanged. This was her son, her Sam, the same child she had raised, the same young man who had gone off to New York to start his career. How had he ended up owning this diner, and why hadn't he told her? She felt a swirl of emotions, pride, confusion, betrayal roiling inside her. Liz's face twisted in frustration, her hands clenched into fists. This is ridiculous. I've been working here for years and you're just going to fire me over a little misunderstanding? Sam didn't flinch. It's not a misunderstanding, Liz. You knew exactly what you were doing. You made my mom feel unwelcome because of her skin color. That's not just a little mistake. That's a problem. Maria could see Liz's expression shift from anger to something darker, something that made her stomach churn. The waitress opened her mouth to say something else, but Sam cut her off again. "You're done, Liz," he said firmly. "I'll have the paperwork for you by tomorrow. You can't work here anymore." For a long moment, Liz didn't move. She just stood there, her chest rising and falling as if she couldn't believe what was happening. Then, with a scowl, she turned on her heel and stalked toward the door, not sparing another glance at Maria or Sam. Maria watched her leave, her mind racing. This whole situation felt surreal. Her son, the owner of the diner, and she had no idea. She had come in here expecting a simple meal, but now she was caught in the middle of something much bigger than she could have imagined. Sam let out a deep breath and turned toward Maria. He didn't seem angry anymore, just tired, and maybe a little sad. His eyes softened as he met her gaze. "Mom, I'm sorry you had to deal with that." Mariah's voice shook as she finally found the words. "Sam, I don't understand. How long has this been going on? How could you? How could you be the owner and not tell me?" Sam looked down at the floor, clearly uncomfortable. "I was going to tell you, Mom. I swear. It's just things have been moving fast, and I didn't know how to bring it up." Maria raised an eyebrow. "Things moving fast? Sam, I've been your mother for a long time. I'm not some stranger. You could have told me." Sam sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know. I should have said something earlier. But I wasn't sure how you'd feel about it. I didn't want you to think I was keeping secrets." Maria frowned, still trying to wrap her mind around everything. "You're telling me that all this time you've been the owner of this diner and I had no idea?" Sam nodded slowly. "Yeah, I bought the diner last year. I've been working with the staff to make improvements, but I didn't want to make a big deal about it. I just wanted it to be normal." Maria could see the regret in his eyes. She wanted to feel angry, but more than anything, she felt a deep sense of confusion. How had her son gotten to this point without telling her? She had raised him to be open, to share his life with her. And now this? She didn't know whether to be proud or hurt. Sam took a step closer, his voice softening. "Mom, I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't want you to find out like this, and especially not this way." Maria could see that he truly was sorry. But even with his apology, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There were too many questions left unanswered. Why hadn't he told her? Why had Liz treated her so badly? And most importantly, what did this mean for the diner and for their relationship? As she struggled to process everything, she heard a voice from the back of the diner. "Sam?" a new voice called out. Maria turned to see a young man, perhaps in his mid-20s, walking toward them. He was wearing a black apron, and he had the same confident air as Sam. He stopped beside Sam, giving him a quick, respectful nod, before turning to Maria with a smile. "Is everything all right?" the young man asked, his voice calm but with an edge of concern. Sam looked at him and nodded. "Yeah, I just let Liz go. We had a situation." The young man's eyes flickered to Maria, a brief look of understanding crossing his face. "I see. Well, if there's anything I can do to help, Sam raised his hand, cutting him off. Thanks, Tim. I've got it from here. Just make sure the rest of the staff knows we're closing up early tonight. Tim nodded, looking relieved. He gave Maria a polite smile before heading toward the back of the diner. Maria glanced at Sam, still struggling with the wave of emotions crashing over her. She needed time to think, to make sense of everything. I don't know what to say, Sam, she said quietly. I'm just shocked and confused. Sam placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. I understand, Mom. I promise. I'll explain everything, but right now, I just want to make sure you're okay. Maria nodded, but a feeling of unease still lingered in her chest. This diner, her son's business, was no longer just a place of comfort. It was a place filled with tension, secrets, and questions that needed answers. As Sam led her to a booth and they sat down, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held for them, and how, in a place she thought she knew so well, she had just stumbled into a world full of surprises, some good, but some she wasn't sure she could trust. Would this diner, once a comforting stop on her long drives, ever feel the same again? And what did Liz's departure really mean for the future of the restaurant? Maria had more questions than answers, but one thing was certain. This was only the beginning of a much bigger story. Maria sat in the booth, her mind racing as Sam took a seat across from her. The hum of the diner's soft music and the clatter of silverware in the background seemed distant, like everything in the room was happening in a world that was no longer hers. She tried to focus, to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions that had just hit her, but the confusion was overwhelming. She looked at Sam, waiting for him to explain. He was her son, the same little boy she had raised. The same boy who had gone off to New York, hoping to build a future. And now, here he was, the owner of the diner she'd walked into without a clue. I don't get it, Maria said, her voice trembling a little. How could you keep something like this from me, Sam? I mean, you're my son. You're the last person I expected to hide something like this from me. Sam looked down at his hands for a moment before meeting her gaze. His expression was filled with regret, but there was something else, something Maria couldn't quite place. I never meant to keep it from you, he said softly. It's just when I first got this place, I wanted to make sure it was stable before I told anyone. I wanted to be sure I could handle it. But once I started making changes, it just got complicated. Maria folded her arms across her chest. Complicated? Sam, what kind of changes are we talking about? You own a diner. It's not a corporation. You're not running a huge business empire. Sam's eyes softened, and his voice dropped a notch in intensity. It's more than just a diner, Mom. It's not just about the food or the business. It's about people, their stories, the relationships here. And with that comes a lot of responsibility. There are employees, there's the history of the place, and then there's the stuff I didn't expect. The stuff like what just happened with Liz. Maria's eyebrows furrowed as she listened. Liz? Yeah, Sam said, his tone heavy. She's not just some waitress. She's been here for years, and honestly, I didn't know much about her background when I first took over. But over time, I started hearing things. I didn't want to believe it at first, but she's been making comments to the other staff, to the customers. Nothing overt, just little things that added up. Maria leaned forward, trying to make sense of the situation. What do you mean? What kind of comments? Sam sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. Racist comments. Nothing that would get her immediately fired, but enough to make people uncomfortable. And when she saw you today, I guess she just couldn't hide it anymore. She treated you like you didn't belong here, like you didn't deserve to eat in the same place as everyone else. Mariah's heart sank as the pieces clicked together. She'd known something was wrong from the moment Liz spoke to her, but she hadn't been able to put her finger on it. Now, hearing Sam's words, it made sense. But it was more than just Liz's behavior. It was the shock of finding out that her son had been hiding so much from her, and the revelation that he owned the diner she had visited so many times. "So you've been letting her get away with it?" Maria asked quietly, trying to keep the judgment out of her voice. Sam's face reddened slightly. "I tried to give her a chance. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. And honestly, at first, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. But then I started seeing it more. The way she looked at people of color like they were beneath her. How she treated my mom today, that was the last straw." Maria nodded, her mind still reeling. She wanted to understand, but the situation was too overwhelming. "But Sam, this is your business. You're the one in charge now. How could you not know something like this was happening?" "I don't know, Mom. I was just trying to make sure everything worked, take care of the bills, the staff, the customers. I didn't want to jump in too quickly, especially when it came to firing people. It's hard when you're running a business for the first time. But I couldn't ignore it any longer. Not after today." Maria stared at Sam, her emotions swirling. She wanted to be proud of him. She really did. But there was still a lot of hurt, a lot of confusion that needed to be sorted out. "Sam," she said softly, "I don't know if I'm ready to just forgive her. She treated me like dirt today. And now, hearing all this, I just feel so betrayed. I've been coming here for years, and I never imagined this could be going on behind the scenes." "I understand," Sam replied. "I'm not asking you to forgive her, but I promise you, I'll make things right. I'll make sure something like this never happens again." Just then, the door to the diner opened with a soft chime, and a familiar voice called out, "Hey, Sam, you doing all right?" Maria turned to see a woman walking in, carrying a bag of groceries. She was tall and athletic, with curly hair pulled back into a ponytail, wearing a simple shirt and jeans. Sam's face immediately brightened when he saw her. "Yeah, Tim, everything's fine," Sam said, standing up from the booth to greet her. "Just had a little issue with one of the employees." Tim smiled and set the bag down on the counter. "I heard. You handling things?" "Trying to," Sam said with a chuckle, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Maria stood up as well, not sure what to expect. She was still processing everything, but Tim seemed calm and composed, the kind of person who would know how to handle a crisis. "Mom, this is Tim," Sam introduced. "He's been helping me run things behind the scenes. He's basically been my right hand here. Tim, this is my mom, Maria." Tim extended a hand with a friendly smile. "Nice to meet you, Maria. Sam's told me a lot about you." Maria shook his hand, but she didn't feel the warmth she would have expected. Everything was still so strange. She'd heard about Tim from Sam before, but meeting him now, under these circumstances, just didn't sit right. "Nice to meet you too," Maria said, forcing a smile. "I didn't realize Sam had so many people helping him with the diner." Tim nodded. "Yeah, it's a lot of work for one person, but Sam's doing great. He's been a quick learner." Sam grinned, but there was still an edge to his expression. "Thanks, Tim. I think I've got it from here, though." "Sure thing," Tim said, giving Maria a quick nod before heading toward the kitchen. "Let me know if you need anything." Maria sat back down in the booth, looking at Sam. Her mind was still filled with too many thoughts to process, but one thing was clear. There were still a lot of changes to come, and not just in the diner. Sam had made a decision today, but it was a decision that would affect the entire community and their relationship as mother and son. She took a deep breath. Sam, what happens now? With Liz gone? With everything that's been going on here? Sam's eyes hardened. What happens now is I make sure this diner is a place where everyone is welcome. I won't tolerate anything like this happening again. And if that means firing more people or making changes, so be it. Mariah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Are there others like Liz here?" Sam hesitated for a moment before answering. "None. There are a few, But don't worry, I'm not going to make any rash decisions. He'll take care of it. I wanted you to know the truth, Mom. Maria stared at him, unsure of how to respond. Her son had just revealed a side of himself that she had never expected. But there was something else behind his words: determination, resolve. And for the first time since the scene with Liz, Maria felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe things were changing for the better. But the question lingered in her mind. Could Sam really make the diner a place where everyone was truly welcome? Would he be able to fix what had been broken? And more importantly, would they be able to heal their relationship as mother and son? The next few days felt like a blur to Maria. The world around her seemed to spin faster than usual, and no matter how hard she tried to grasp at the edges of everything, she couldn't quite find her footing. His diner, had become a focal point of change, and not just in the way she thought. Maria couldn't stop replaying the moment Liz had been fired, and the way Sam had stood his ground. She had always known Sam was strong-willed, but seeing him take control of his business, especially with such a tough decision, made her proud. At the same time, though, there was still a lingering discomfort she couldn't shake. Sam had been hiding so much from her, things she felt she should have known. His success, his struggles, his vision for the diner, it was all new to her. And there was a part of her that felt like a stranger in his world. That morning, as Maria sat at the kitchen table, her mind was still heavy with questions. How had Sam managed to get to this point in his life? Why hadn't he shared more with her? He'd always been independent, yes, but this felt different. Like he had been carrying a secret burden on his shoulders for a long time. A burden she didn't know about until now. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the caller ID. It was Sam. "Hey, Sam," she said as she picked up the phone. "Hey, Mom," Sam's voice came through, sounding more upbeat than she expected. "I need to talk to you about something." Maria felt her pulse quicken. "What's going on? Is everything okay at the diner?" "Yeah, everything's fine," he said, sounding more relaxed now. "Actually, I think it's going better than I expected. But listen, there's something I've been meaning to bring up. Something important." Maria frowned, her nerves tightening. "What is it, Sam?" "You're worrying me." He paused for a moment. "I want to invite you to come by the diner today. I've got a meeting with Tim and a few others. I think it's time we start talking about what comes next. I want you to be a part of that conversation." "I need your help, Mom." Mariah's heart fluttered in her chest. She wasn't sure what Sam was asking of her, but she couldn't ignore the sudden sense of urgency in his voice. "Of course, I'll be there," she said, her voice steady despite the growing curiosity gnawing at her. "What's going on? What do you mean? What comes next?" "I'll explain when you get here," he replied, his tone lighter now. "Just trust me. It's all going to make sense. I need you to see the changes I'm planning." "Okay," Maria said slowly. "I'll see you soon." She hung up the phone, still feeling unsure of what she was walking into. But if Sam wanted her to be a part of it, she would go. She had to. After everything that had happened, she owed it to him and to herself to understand what was really going on. A little while later, Maria arrived at the diner. She could see the changes Sam had been talking about. The place looked different. Some of the old, worn-out furniture had been replaced. New paint brightened up the walls, and a small section of the dining room had been rearranged. It wasn't anything drastic, but there was a noticeable shift, a sense of newness that hung in the air. As Maria stepped inside, she was greeted by a few of the familiar faces she had seen here over the years. Tim was at the counter working with a couple of staff members, and when he saw her, he gave her a warm smile and a nod. "Hey, Maria," he called out. "How are you doing today?" "Good, Tim. Just here to meet Sam," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She walked toward the back of the diner where Sam had set up for the meeting. Sam was waiting for her by a booth near the back, a serious look on his face as he stood up to greet her. "Thanks for coming, Mom." Maria nodded, scanning the room as she took a seat. "You called me here, Sam. What's going on? What's all this about?" "I know it's a lot to take in," Sam said, sitting down across from her. "But I need to make some tough decisions, and I want your advice. This diner, it's more than just a place to eat. It's a part of this community. People rely on it, but I've seen how much work it's going to take to turn things around. I'm going to have to make changes, big ones." Maria felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Big changes? What kind of changes? Tim, who had followed her over to the booth, sat down next to Sam. "It's about the people here," he said, his tone serious. "Sam's not just trying to fix the diner. He's trying to fix the culture of this place. And that means getting rid of anyone who doesn't fit with the values he's trying to create here." Mariah's mind raced. "So you're firing more people?" Sam nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's not something I want to do, but I can't let people like Liz stay here if they don't respect what we're trying to build. And it's not just her. We've got a couple of other staff members who have been contributing to the same toxic environment. If we want this place to be a safe, welcoming space for everyone, I need to make sure the people here reflect those values." Maria looked at her son, the weight of his words sinking in. "Sam, you're talking about changing the entire staff." "I have to," he said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "I want this place to be different. I want people to feel like they can walk in here no matter who they are and be treated with respect. That starts with the people who work here." Maria couldn't help but admire Sam's resolve, but the thought of him firing people he had worked with for so long made her heart ache. "This is a big decision, Sam. And it's not just about the staff. You're talking about changing the entire culture of the diner. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Tim chimed in, his voice calm but reassuring. "We've been talking about this for a while, Maria. Sam's not doing this alone. We've got a plan. We've started talking to the rest of the staff. People know change is coming." Maria sat back in her seat, processing everything. She could see the passion in Sam's eyes, the way he believed in what he was doing. But she also knew that running a business was more than just making decisions about people. It was about creating something that would last, and sometimes that meant making sacrifices. "I understand, Sam," Maria said slowly, "but you have to be careful. You can't just change things overnight. People have been working here for years. It's not just about what you want. It's about what this diner means to everyone who walks through those doors." Sam nodded, his expression softening. "I know, Mom. But sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that have to be made to protect what really matters. And this diner, it's my responsibility. I'm not going to let it become a place that hurts people, not on my watch." Maria looked at her son, a surge of pride filling her chest. He was no longer the little boy she had raised. Sam had become a man with a vision, and he was willing to fight for what he believed in, no matter the cost. But even as she admired his resolve, Maria couldn't help but wonder how far Sam was willing to go. Would these changes really be enough to fix everything? Or would the weight of his decisions become too much to bear? The sound of the diner's door opening interrupted her thoughts. A customer walked in, and as they passed by their booth, Maria noticed something strange. The room was quieter than usual. People seemed to be watching them, waiting for something to happen. Maria could feel the eyes of the staff on her, as though they were waiting for her approval or her judgment. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the silence. She pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a text from her friend Carla. "Are you okay? Heard about the diner. Just wanted to check in." Maria stared at the message, her heart heavy with a new sense of uncertainty. This was bigger than just Sam's diner. This was about the community, about trust, and about how much change could truly be accepted. She put the phone down slowly and turned her gaze back to Sam. "Sam, am here for you. But it's going to be harder than you think. You're not just changing a business, you're changing lives." Sam's eyes locked with hers. "I know, Mom, but sometimes you have to break something down to build it back up stronger." Maria took a deep breath, a mix of emotions flooding through her. She had never been more sure of one thing. Sam wasn't just the owner of a diner. He was becoming the kind of man who could change the world. But would it be enough? And what would the future of this diner and in their relationship look like when all was said and done? The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Sam's decisions, though necessary, created a ripple effect that spread far beyond the walls of the diner. Word got around quickly that he was making changes, big changes, and that Liz, along with a couple of other employees, had been fired. Some people praised Sam for his courage in making such tough calls, but others felt uneasy. It wasn't easy for anyone, least of all Sam, but he was determined to follow through with his vision. Maria, though proud of her son, couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. She'd seen how hard Sam had worked to build his life in New York, but the gravity of his current actions weighed on her. He wasn't just changing the diner. He was challenging the entire culture of the place, and with it, the people who had spent years making it their home. The balance between progress and tradition was delicate, and Maria worried that Sam might lose sight of it in his drive to create something better. One afternoon, Maria decided to visit the diner again. Sam had asked her to come in earlier that morning, and though she hadn't heard the full details, she knew it was time for another big shift. She had hoped that the storm of changes had calmed down, but as she walked through the door, she immediately knew she had been wrong. The diner was unusually quiet, the usual hum of conversation and clinking silverware replaced by a subdued atmosphere. As soon as she stepped inside, Tim approached her with a somber expression on his face. "Hey, Maria," Tim said quietly, giving her a gentle nod. "Sam's in the back. He's been waiting for you." "Thanks, Tim," Maria replied, a knot forming in her stomach as she followed him through the restaurant. Her mind raced. Something was off. She had never seen the place so still. The chatter, the buzz, it was always part of what made the diner feel alive. But today, it was different. It felt like something was hanging in the air, something that hadn't been fully addressed. When Maria reached the back, she found Sam sitting at a small table with a few other people, all of whom she recognized. They were staff members she had seen working at the diner over the years, but their faces, normally full of energy and enthusiasm, looked drained. There was a heaviness to the atmosphere, like they were all holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Sam stood up when he saw her, a tired but sincere smile on his face. "Hey, Mom. Thanks for coming." Maria took a seat next to him, noticing the tension in the room. "Sam, what's going on? You look like you're carrying the weight of the world right now." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's been complicated. I've made some more decisions that have upset some people. The new staff members are settling in okay, but not everyone's happy with the changes, especially the regulars." Maria nodded slowly, trying to understand. "Are you saying people are leaving? Because of the changes?" "Not exactly," Sam said, his voice quiet. "But we've lost a few loyal customers. People who've been coming here for years, even decades. They feel like the place isn't the same anymore. And the staff, well, some of them are struggling to adjust. It's not easy to suddenly turn everything upside down. And the worst part is, some of them are starting to blame me for it." Maria could see the stress etched into Sam's features. It was clear he hadn't anticipated the backlash to be this strong. He had always believed that change would bring improvement, that a cleaner, more inclusive environment would attract more customers. But now, he was facing a harsh reality change, especially when it touches something as personal as a community gathering spot, doesn't always come without a cost. Before Maria could respond, one of the other staff members, an older man named Carl, spoke up. Sam, we've been talking, Carl said, his voice low. A lot of the regulars are upset. They're not just mad about Liz getting fired or the new look. It's the feeling that the diner doesn't belong to them anymore. You know, this place used to feel like home, but now it feels different. They say it's too sanitized, too corporate. They're worried about losing that feeling of familiarity. Sam's face tightened, and he clenched his fists on the table. I didn't want that to happen, Carl. I just wanted it to be a place where everyone could come and feel welcome. But I guess I was so focused on fixing what was broken that I didn't realize how much this place meant to people who'd been coming here for decades. Maria listened to the exchange, her heart aching for Sam. She could see the conflict in his eyes. He had wanted to do the right thing, to bring about positive change, but it wasn't as simple as he'd thought. Sometimes, progress meant letting go of something that had been a part of people's lives for years, and even if the changes were necessary, they came with pain. Sam, Maria said gently, her voice breaking through the tension in the room. I understand that you want this place to be better, but maybe you're forgetting that it wasn't just the physical space that made the diner special. It was the people, the history, the feeling of belonging. Sam looked at her, his eyes searching her face. I know, Mom. I've been so focused on fixing everything. I forgot about that. I didn't realize how much the history of the diner meant to people. But I don't want to undo the progress I've made. I can't go back to how things were. Carl nodded in understanding, but he still looked uncertain. We're not asking you to go back, Sam. We're just asking you to remember what made this place special in the first place. The people who came here, the staff who've worked here, the regulars, they all had a part in building what this diner is. Don't forget them. Sam sat back in his chair, deep in thought. Maria could see the wheels turning in his head. He wasn't just thinking about the diner anymore. He was thinking about his own identity as its owner, his own responsibility. And with that responsibility came not only the need for change, but the necessity of balancing progress with respect for tradition. I hear you, Carl, Sam said quietly. I didn't realize how much of a delicate balance this would be. Maybe I need to step back and listen a little more. To the staff, to the customers. I can't just impose change without considering the people who have kept this place alive all these years. Maria felt a shift in the room as Sam spoke. It was as if the weight on his shoulders had lightened just a little. The tension in the room, though still present, seemed to ease. Sam was beginning to realize that the key to running this diner wasn't just about setting things right, it was about understanding the past and building on it rather than erasing it. Sam, Maria said softly, her voice filled with pride. You don't have to fix everything all at once. Just take your time. Get to know your customers, your staff, and the history of this place. You'll figure out what works. I believe in you. Sam looked at her, his eyes full of gratitude. Thanks, Mom. I needed to hear that. He turned to Carl and the others. I know I've made mistakes, and I'm sorry for that, but I'm not giving up on this place. We're going to figure this out together. Carl gave him a small smile. That's all we're asking, Sam. We're all in this together. The room seemed to breathe again, the tension dissipating as the staff and Sam began to talk more openly. Maria could see the change in the way Sam was approaching the situation. It wasn't just about making decisions anymore. It was about listening, learning, and building something that would last. As she sat there, watching her son take the first steps toward reconciling his vision with the reality of the diner's history, Maria felt a sense of hope stir within her. Sam wasn't just trying to run a diner. He was learning how to lead, how to navigate the complexities of ownership, and most importantly, how to balance change with respect for the past. But even as Maria allowed herself to feel a small flicker of hope, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Could Sam really navigate this delicate balance? And would the people who had been a part of the diner's life for so long accept the changes he had in mind? One thing was certain. The journey was far from over. But Maria knew one thing for sure. Her son was ready for the challenge. The weeks following Sam's decision to embrace a more balanced approach were filled with small but meaningful shifts at the diner. The air was lighter, less tense. Conversations between the staff were more open, and the customers, though still wary, began to return. It wasn't an instant fix, but it was a start. Sam had begun to genuinely listen to the concerns of both his employees and his regulars, something he had failed to do in the rush of making changes too quickly. Maria watched her son with growing pride. He was the same young man who had first opened the diner years ago. Sam had evolved into someone who understood the complexity of running a business, but more importantly, someone who understood people. He wasn't just managing a restaurant anymore. He was managing relationships, histories, and the very heartbeat of the community. The diner was still buzzing with activity, but now it felt warmer, more inviting. Regulars who had stayed away started trickling back in, and new faces were beginning to fill the booths. There was still work to be done, of course. Some staff members were still adjusting, but there was a newfound respect among them, all respect for the hard work that had come before and for the future Sam was building. One afternoon, as Maria entered the diner for her usual lunch, she was greeted by a familiar sight. Sam standing behind the counter, chatting with customers and making sure everything ran smoothly. Tim, Carl, and a few other staff members were bussed, laying around, keeping the place running like a well-oiled machine. As Maria slid into a booth near the window, Sam caught sight of her and smiled, walking over to join her. "Hey, Mom, how's it going?" Sam asked, pulling up a chair. Maria smiled, grateful for how far they had come. "It's going well, Sam. I can't believe how much this place has changed." He shrugged, a modest smile playing on his lips. "It's still a work in progress, but I think we're on the right track now. I've learned a lot along the way, about business, people, and even myself." Maria looked at her son, seeing the quiet confidence in his eyes. "I'm proud of you, Sam," she said, her voice full of sincerity. "Not just for fixing the diner, but for the way you've handled everything. You've really grown through all of this." Sam chuckled, shaking his head. "It hasn't been easy, but I wouldn't have gotten through it without the support of people like you, Mom. And Tim and Carl, they've been incredible." "Well, you've earned it," Maria said. "But don't forget, it's not just about fixing what's broken. It's about appreciating what you have, too." Sam nodded thoughtfully, looking around the diner. "Yeah, I've learned that. The people who've been coming here for years, they were right. This place isn't just a business. It's part of who they are. And now, I get it." As they spoke, a few of the regulars greeted Sam from their tables, and he returned their greetings with a warmth that made Mariah's heart swell. The diner had truly transformed. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, more real than it had been in a long time. As the days passed, the changes that Sam had made, those that respected the diner's history and embraced a fresh perspective, began to pay off. The diner became a place where people didn't just come for a meal, but for a sense of belonging. And as Sam stood at the front of his restaurant one evening, looking over the family, our faces that filled the booths and counter, he realized something. It wasn't just the diner that had changed, it was him. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most important change of all. The diner was thriving again, not just because of the food or the new decor, but because Sam had learned what truly mattered: the connections between people, the trust built over years, and the willingness to grow without losing sight of what had come before. Sam had learned how to honor the past, make the difficult decisions, and still keep the heart of the diner alive. And as Maria sat back, watching her son engage with his customers, her heart filled with hope. She had always believed in Sam, but now she could see that he was more than ready to lead not just the diner, but the future that awaited him. Together, they had weathered the storm, and now they were both ready to embrace the possibilities that lay ahead. The diner wasn't just a place for food anymore. It was a place for change, for second chances, for growth. And in that moment, Maria knew that Sam had found his balance, not just as the owner of a diner, but as the man he had always been meant to become. The future looked bright, and it was just the beginning.